So it is the end of 2025 and it is the end of the Bundesliga for this year as we now head into the winter break. This will probably be short because the players clearly wanted a break this weekend because it was god-awfully boring. So let's look back at it. So to start on Friday, it was probably one of the biggest games this weekend. It was Borussia Dortmund versus Borussia Mönchengladbach. Dortmund ended the year with a win. It was a very feisty game. Like both sides were ready to go at it whenever needed, but obviously it didn't come to that. But and there were only two yellow cards in this game. But the way some of the tackles were made and things went in, it proved to be quite a tense and feisty game. But Dortmund were really only good for 20 minutes of the game, but it was enough to win them the game. They scored early from Julian Brandt, contentious opener, because there was a alleged foul in the build-up to the goal. And then as Gladbach were obviously pushing for the equaliser, Maximilian Bayer scored late on. Now, me saying Dortmund were only good for 20 minutes makes you... They did have chances outside of those 20 minutes, but Moritz Nicolas was able to thwart them, again proving he should play for Germany. But it was a good way for Dortmund to end the year, because they find themselves now 9 points behind Borussia Bayern Munich. And if believe in coincidences, in 2022-23, they are also 9 points behind Bayern Munich. However, this Bayern Munich side is completely different to the previous Bayern Munich side. You know, when Bayern actually drop points, then I'll believe it. Then I'll believe something like 2018 is possible. Or 2023, is possible. But as of right now, no. But for Gladbach, again, no, there are still obviously question marks about Niko Kovac and his football. It's obviously quite fitting that Lucien Favre has retired this weekend. Just looking at their goal difference compared to Bayern's, it's completely different. They've only conceded one less goal, but they've scored nearly 30 goals less than Bayern, which should really tell you what Dortmund have been doing. And they've drawn far too many games this season so far. You look at the games that they've played and the games that they've drawn in the league. Freiburg, they were probably lucky to draw that. They drew with Stuttgart, they drew with Hamburg, they should have won. In the Stuttgart game, they conceded late on as well. So that's 6 points already that they could have been better off. And some of those times that was when Bayern had drawn. And you do that, and then you close the gap on them. And obviously Dortmund have actually only lost one game this season so far, and that was against Bayern. And even in that game, they handicapped themselves in the first half. But yeah, as I said before, this style of play from Dortmund is really pointless if you're not really going to win anything or even look like challenging. And obviously there's interesting things going on behind the scenes at Dortmund. And I wouldn't be surprised if sooner or later that actually spills onto the pitch. And if you tell me in the second half of the season that they have a collapse, I wouldn't be surprised. But for Gladbach, they obviously lose this game, so they've lost 2 games in a row now. But, I see the vision with what Eugen Polanski wants to do and how he wants to play the team. You could see these little moments where these nice passing moves or whatever, or sequences. Polanski's problem is some of the players aren't that good. And obviously if they're not good enough, every Football Manager player will know. If you have a style of play that you want to play and the players aren't good enough to implement it, it just doesn't work. And I do think if you could amalgamate Eugen Polanski with the 2022-23 team, Gladbach team, which had Stindl, Thuram, Sommer, Bensebaini, Kone, Player, Hoffman, whatever, we'll need to have a conversation, if you have players of that quality. But I think with this Gladbach side, if Eugen Polanski's style of play is to be successful, then you need better wing backs, better players behind the striker, You can make an argument maybe a better striker too, but I think Tabakovic just gets the job done. And maybe an improvement on the centre-backs too. But apart from that, the spine of the team is okay. Like ankle, heart, rights, I think that works. It's just everything else that's a bit of a problem. But I think considering where Gladbach found themselves 2 months ago, I would say this is probably a good way for them to end the year. Well, not good to end on a loss, but they're 12th. And they have a winnable game against Augsburg the other side of the winter break. And by then, currently injured players like Honorat Hack may also be back from injury. So to Saturday. Admittedly, probably one of the worst Saturdays of football you're ever going to see in your lifetime. Stuttgart and Hoffenheim, 5th versus 6th, ended 0-0. Both teams were feeling the effects of AFCON. Stuttgart were the better side, but both did struggle to create chances. Obviously, both were without Bilal El-Khanis for Stuttgart and Bazimana Toure for Hoffenheim. I mean, Hoffenheim didn't even they registered one shot on target, and that was a long-range effort which Newball comfortably saved. So Stuttgart will probably be thinking, we should have won this. But again, it was quite a poor day for Stuttgart's attackers. Then, the other 0-0 was Augsburg versus Bremen. Enough said. I really think you and me both have better things to do than mull over this game. So I won't be going into it in any more detail. I mean, if you want to watch the highlights, you can, but obviously clearly Augsburg are improving under Michael Baum. Whether they actually, obviously they may hire a new head coach over this winter break, or they may stick with Baum, like Wolfsburg stuck with their head coach, which we'll get to now. Wolfsburg lost to Freiburg 4-3. As I said, Daniel Bauer is now their permanent head coach. He was the interim. Obviously, what the hell was this game by the scoreline? But Wolfsburg threw away their lead 3 times. But they're obviously taking steps in the right direction. Obviously, defence is still a bit of a problem, such as throwing away a 3-goal lead. And like last weekend against Union, or not last weekend against Gladbach because they were quite crap, but against Union, Wolfsburg did look a bit shaky in defence at times. Obviously, Wolfsburg are also affected by AFCON with Mohamed Amoura leaving. However, they seem to benefit from this as Desnan Pejsinovic scored his first goals for the club and scored a hat-trick too. And obviously, completely different style of play to Amoura. Amoura is obviously quite small, he's quick. Pejsinovic is obviously a lot different, a lot bigger, a lot broader, so it does obviously require a slightly different style of play. But there's said to be big potential behind him. He did spend last season on loan at Dusseldorf. And I think once Amoura returns, and if Amoura returns later in January and Pejsinovic has been able to get game time, I think it would be an interesting dynamic, especially the Wolfsburg attack with the likes of Christian Eriksen, along with Amoura and Pejsinovic. I think that will be an interesting dynamic to see it play out, if it does play out. But yeah, Wolfsburg faced Bayern after the winter break, so it will be interesting to see how Wolfsburg and the likes of Mainz and teams that have changed head coach in this part of this, in the first half of the season, appear after the winter break, because obviously that kind of acts as like a mini pre-season. So it allows these head coaches to drill in the style of play and how they want these teams to play. Like Eugen Polanski, he has had 2 months now, but he would have a proper spell to work on some other things. Same with Wolfsburg and Bauer, and Mainz with Urs Fischer, especially Urs Fischer, because he's only had 2 games in charge and he's had 4 games in charge, including the Conference League, and so that's 2 full weeks and not really any time to focus on training. So I will think it'd be interesting how these teams appear after the winter break. One team who they probably won't, but could go into it with a new coach when the Bundesliga returns is Eintracht Frankfurt. They drew 1-1 with Hamburg. Were kind of lucky because Hamburg did have a goal disallowed. Again, defence isn't really that good for Frankfurt at the moment. I mean, the opening goal was scored by Albert Sambi Lokonga, which I think needs highlighting. He is Hamburg's top goal scorer since joining from Arsenal. Obviously, he joined on a free transfer and Vieira joined on loan, and both have been Hamburg's better players. Obviously, Vieira has spent time injured or on the bench because he's been suspended. But Lokonga's kind of found a new lease of life away from the Emirates. So Frankfurt's first goal, which I'll get back to, which I digressed on, came from a defensive error when Mika Zeta rolled the ball out. Nemandi Collins played an iffy pass, which Hugo Larsson missed, and it fell to Lokonga, who was able to score. But then Collins kind of redeemed himself soon afterwards when he played like this long diagonal ball to Nathaniel Brown, and Brown was able to hit it first time into Hugo Larsson to make it 1-1. However, I still do think there are question marks now about Dino Topmüller. If there weren't before, there should be. Because Frankfurt have the second worst defence in the league. They're lucky because of Heidenheim, especially because they conceded 4 to Bayern. But they have one of the worst defences in the league. It's quite obvious that defence is a problem for them. Either they're doing work on the training ground and it's not working, or they're just neglecting it and going, you know what, let's just do vibes and we'll just ride it out and hope we score more than them. Because it's just not working, you know. And if Topmüller is, if he's not aware, there's a problem. But if he is aware and he's trying to fix this and this is not working, then you've really got to put things into consideration. I mean, when it comes to the tactic of you score, we score more, obviously what doesn't help Frankfurt is the likes of Chanuzun is still coming back from his injury. Jonathan Burkhardt is injured as well. That doesn't help, which is obviously why they're going to invest in strikers in the winter. But they still need defensive-minded players, a midfielder, like I said before, a defender. You know, they need they need to invest in these type of players, more the defensive-minded ones, because as things stand, because of Frankfurt's volatility when it comes to their defending, they're slowly drifting away from the European places. More really needs to be done, and as some have said, some Frankfurt fans, you know, 1 or 2 decisions, refereeing decisions, go Frankfurt's opponent's way, and we're having a completely different conversation here about Frankfurt's recent run of results. And I think despite their recent run of results, there should still be question marks about Topmüller, because the defending is becoming a real big problem. And again, like, even attack is a struggle at the moment with the absentees. And if you're not able to find a solution with your current set of players, then that's also a bit of a question mark. Finally, on this game, Hamburg's goal song, one of the best around. If you don't know it, know it. And it's also just based off the Always Hardcore song by Scooter. Scooter also has Maria, I Like It Loud, which is also a goal song for the likes of Borussia Mönchengladbach. But I think the Hamburg goal song, especially when it's like a late goal and you're hearing like the sound in the background, like of the Always Hardcore song, it's got aura, I'll say that. Then the final Saturday afternoon game was Cologne versus Union Berlin. Union won this 1-0 with a late goal. It does mean they're now 5 points off of Europe. So there's a lot of talk about Cologne being the surprise of the season. It's either Hoffenheim or more likely Union Berlin. They're significantly punching above their weight again. While Cologne are now 1 win in the last 9 games, which is against Hamburg, and they haven't won in their last 6. And they continue to slip backwards, and it won't be long before Gladbach overtake them. And I remember, you know, they were saying, we played, in the comments of a clip I posted, we played difficult teams like Mainz. Mainz are dead last. and they just continue to slide backwards. So on Saturday evening, it was Bayer Leverkusen versus RB Leipzig in Leipzig. It was a good game. Leipzig took the lead through Xaver Schlager, and then Leverkusen scored a quick double after from Martin Terrier, who had a great looping header, and then Patrick Schick. And the debutant, Montrell Kulbreth, scored right at the end of the game to make it 3-1. Again, this was a decent performance from Leverkusen, as it was one of those ones where they had to really lock up the defence when they needed to, and they were able to. Mark Flecken, he obviously has his moments of question marks, but he has shown that like sometimes when Leverkusen's back is against the wall, he can turn up and make several key saves and actually give the impression that he is a calming presence in defence. What Kasper Heumann has been able to do, and again, like you could maybe include Leverkusen, what I said earlier about appearing after the winter break, he's been able to, like the formation is the same. They played under Alonso, and obviously maybe some of the fundamentals are also the same, but he's managed to get the best out of players who were not playing well under Alonso. Garcia, Artur, Terrier, granted Terrier was more injury related, even Jonas Hoffmann. He's managed to kind of like revive in a way these players' careers and get the best out of them. I mean, Terrier especially, he's had a horrid time with injuries, but he obviously scores that scorpion kick last week and he scored again this week. And granted, it's probably a shame that the winter breaks came on when he's hit form, but he's obviously a valuable asset to Leverkusen now and looking somewhat like the player he was when he was at Rennes. And I do think like Leverkusen have the potential to challenge for a title eventually, not now. Like the potential in this team, I do think, is a lot greater than the likes of Dortmund, and they could challenge for a title a lot sooner than Dortmund. If things stayed as they are, as in you kept the head coaches and the current set of players, Leverkusen have a better chance than Dortmund. Whereas for Leipzig, it's quite obvious they needed the winter break. They really lacked energy. They have a lot of injuries to senior players, and they just, like, they had the energy because, you know, let's just overdose on Red Bull. But, like, they also lacked it, if that makes sense. Like, when they were chasing the game, Konrad Harder was the most lively player in the team. And he actually looked quite impressive. He was basically everywhere. And I think as he continues to find his feet, he's going to get better and better. And I think he could become a real nuisance for the Bundesliga once it clicks for him at Leipzig. Obviously, both these teams are also affected by AFCON. Leverkusen most affected, the likes of Tapsoba, Maza, and other people like Ben Seguir. While Leipzig lost Jan Diomande, and you could tell like they lacked Jan Diomande in this game. So yeah, Sunday, Mainz, St. Pauli finished 0-0. 2 shots on target the whole game. I don't understand what type of analysis you want from me. It was a relegation 6-pointer. Either team probably wanted to win this more, but at the end of the day, it ended 0-0. Then to round out the year, Heidenheim played Bayern Munich, and Bayern obviously won this 4-0. It went as you expect it would. But what was interesting is Bayern did give several debuts in this game. Or Vincent Kompany gave several debuts, should I say. David Santos and Cassiano Chiala were both given their debuts. So it did mean at one point, Bayern had 4 campus players on the pitch at once. So the 2 substitutes, as well as Stanisic and Lennart Karl. Last season, Kompany got a lot of flack for not really giving youth players a chance, but obviously this season is completely different, and obviously when you're stomping a team, you can give the youth players a chance. And finally, Deont Ramage is the Heidenheim goalkeeper, but he's on loan from Borussia Dortmund. So far, obviously you could play, the devil advocate is he's playing for Heidenheim. You know, they're fighting at the bottom of the table. But is he good enough to replace Kobel? While Ramage has like a lot of confidence in himself, he's probably not good enough to replace Kobel. So as I said, this is the end of the year. Looking back at it, we're talking about the season, or the first half of it. We're not even halfway through the season, I like to say this. We're still 2 games away. But obviously Hoffenheim and Union are definitely the surprises. Could Bayern collapse in the second half of the season? As I said earlier on, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it'd be impressive if they do. But here's the thing, for both Bayern and Dortmund, there are question marks about, will come March, April, May time, will they finally hit a wall when it comes to the Club World Cup that they played? Because it will catch up eventually, and it's whether it will affect either of them. Obviously it could act as a bit of a positive because it gives them a more intense pre-season at the beginning of the season. But when you get to the latter end, when everyone starts to get tired and fatigued, that could be a completely different thing. Leverkusen obviously going to be happy with the fact they sacked their head coach after 2 games, and it looked like a real mess, especially with everyone leaving too. The same with Leipzig, they had a complete refresh, and so we'll be happy they're in the top 4. Stuttgart will probably wish they did better. There's a couple of games where they probably could have won. The Hamburg one, for example. But they've also had to deal with a couple of injuries. Frankfurt, gone over it. Then at the bottom, Mainz obviously will need to close the gap of 6 points. St. Pauli have found their way-ish, while Heidenheim are just a bit confusing. And then you've got the teams that are still without, you've got the teams that fired their head coach more recently in Wolfsburg and Augsburg too. Whether they can turn a corner, how will the newly promoted teams do? What are Werder Bremen going to do? They're currently 10th and they've lost the last 5 games, but because of everyone else below them, they've been able to maintain their positioning. And so really that's the table, and some of the questions we will have heading into the new year. Obviously, after the break, there's some real standout games with Frankfurt playing Dortmund, Leverkusen playing Stuttgart, and then you've got the likes of Bayern against Wolfsburg, while Leipzig plays St. Pauli. So I think it will be interesting to see how some of these teams come out at the other end of the winter break, whether they've improved massively, gotten worse, and what type of business they'll be doing in the summer, or in the winter, I mean, there are some teams that really need to be doing some business, and there's other teams that may not, but decide, okay, let's sign another player. So I think it will be interesting, and knowing the Bundesliga, there will be some chaos that happen over the winter break. What it will be, who knows? But let me know what you think about the weekend and what you think heading into the winter break. What are your earlier takeaways from this season so far?